Hello Void and all who inhabit it, it's me, and this is an Olive Spectre approved videocast. Welcome back to another selection of the Special Interest Files. Just in time for the start of spooky season, today we're talking about the Gothic influences behind modern interpretations of death gods experiencing love. I'll be focusing on 4 different partnerships as our case studies: Hades and Persephone from ancient Greek mythology, Humkame and Cassiopeia from gods of jade and shadow, Serapio and Ciala from Black Sun, and Obe and Audrey from Mortal. I'm giving you a multimedia hyperfixation today. But first, who are these people? Hades and Persephone are the ancient Greek god of the underworld and goddess of, among other things, destruction, who serves as the embodiment of spring and queen of the underworld, respectively. Humkame and Cassiopeia from gods of jade and shadow are a Mayan death god and a young woman from the Yucatan. Serapio and Ciala from Black Sun are a vessel for the reincarnation of the carrion crow god and a lone mermaid pirate. Obe and Audrey from Mortal are a quote-unquote voodoo god who introduces himself as transporting souls and a high school counselor trying to aid in the destruction of said god. From a higher level, these death gods, as opposed to representing a type of death or the act of dying, function as rulers of the underworld and or the caretakers of souls. The exception is Serapio, who is not specifically a death god, but a god who is a harbinger of death for others. I'm still using him because Black Sun is amazing, and many of these characteristics fit his story with Ciala as well. A quick note about Hades and Persephone. While you could debate the denotation of the R word and how it has changed over time, the ancient mythical version of their story has Hades kidnap Persephone, without question. Modern interpretations have taken creative liberties with Persephone's agency and Hades' level of awfulness to form versions that much more frequently suggest that Persephone willingly joined Hades, or at least was a much more active participant in the whole shebang. I'm going to be looking at this second, more modern interpretation of the story, but I wanted to, 1, acknowledge the root of this myth, and 2, highlight a shift that I think is indicative of, at the least, modern desires to romance the taboo. All 4 of these stories present isolated and lonely people falling in love, often with an added layer of a stark contrast that makes pairing them even more tempting. With loneliness comes the inevitable quest for connection, but that's complicated when you take into account that there is an inherent gap between the divine and the mortal, not just in terms of life state, but also with regards to morality, behavior, and worldview. Strongly written stories that show humans interacting with deities often show the discomfort that exists because of said gap, but death gods have a thicker layer of distance that is often fueled by being disconnected from the rest of their pantheon as well. As a result, this being, more than usual, does not know how to behave with living mortals, with others in general, which can impact how they navigate, most importantly, fear and kindness. What is interesting in these stories is the emotional gap between deity and human that mirrors the use of the abhuman in Gothic literature. The abhuman subject is a not quite human subject, characterized by its morphic variability, continually in danger of becoming not itself, becoming other. These are beings like vampires, reanimated corpse collages, near monstrous doppelgangers, and, for our conversation, super hot emotionally unavailable death deities. Traditional Gothic literature is both terrified of and enthralled by the not quite humanness. In turn, abhuman characters can be used to play with boundaries. True humanity is this because it's not that, but are we really sure? Death god love stories similarly push against boundaries of what humanity, or even what divinity, is truly meant to be. This questioning is done so through building intimacy and emotional connection between 2 unlikely partners. While death gods are feared, shunned, or exiled, the love interest is similarly detached from a community. Persephone is kept effectively caged by Demeter. Cassiopeia is basically Cinderella, but her mother is still alive. Chiala has been exiled from the rest of the Teak, and Audrey seems to isolate herself as punishment for not being able to save a student. All of this lack of social interaction adds the potential for desperation or confusion or interest around building a connection. A combination of these three traits is integral to these people being in the position to consider each other as options. Gothic literature emerged during the Enlightenment period, when Western societies were focused on science and in turn experiencing a clash between traditional understandings about life and newer scientific ones. In literature, this led to an obsession with death and mortality. Not the act of dying per se, but what happens after you are dead. Tying in with the abhuman and playing with boundaries, what if there's a space in between the good place and the bad place? What if it's this place where the dead can return? Death and the dead are presented as threatening, horrifying, and potentially haunting. Romancing death turns away from that fear. We are presented the potential to explore the burden of these deities' position as opposed to our own concerns about human mortality. In this, it's important that these deities are not the personification of death, but the rulers of the dead. Death is shown as something that's just as isolating to them, or as an enjoyable realm, but either way, the fear of our own end has been replaced with another emotion directed towards the person who deals with all the souls. I'm reminded of Satan from This Is Kind of Gross. We learn at one point that hell is not a separate place, it is within him, and it causes him pain. Natalie later sacrifices herself to give him peace from that pain. And although Natalie and Satan's relationship, at least at the point I'm at, isn't romantic, it shares a couple of traits with these other four relationships. Along with the numerous modern stories that have been pulled from or directly recreated the Hades Persephone setup, there is a greater desire within media to pursue the most tortured of souls. Usually in Gothic literature, there is a highly emphasized need to follow social rules that clashes with personal desires. Our main character represses said desires, and then said repression leads to bad shit happening. In contrast, the heroines courting death challenge limits by pursuing what's taboo. They navigate the gray morality of what one partner may be willing to do and what the other has already done. They avoid implosion by crossing boundaries. However, there are caveats. This love may be short-lived and may come with continuous obstacles, or both. In this, the stories follow in the Gothic tradition of an unhappily ever after. Importantly, though, modern stories provide more agency to women and are less disparaging than traditional Gothic fiction. Of the four examples, Audrey is the closest to this traditional model, ending up fridged mid-season 2, but most of our heroines aren't murdered or seen as burdens at the end of their stories. In fact, they may end with more agency than they started with. Regardless, the caveats to their love path are a consequence for having loved the monster as opposed to a hero. Although a lot of modern retellings of Hades and Persephone are basically Beauty and the Beast but with weather magic, there's a mean, scary apple who the heroine will sass into submission, there's an extra monstrous layer over the beast, one that's more than just aesthetic. With our death deities, especially those falling for humans, their resulting monstrosity comes from the lack of humanity and connection to emotion that is both enticing and terrifying. A major conflict of the story is then the potential for this being to grow a heart versus the fear or inability of him to do so because of advanced deity ambivalence. Throughout the journey in Gods of Jade and Shadow, Kame is becoming more human, literally growing the ability to have feelings, and ultimately has to choose if he wants to give up his immortality or his newfound emotional system. The choice he makes seemingly still allows him to maintain something of the other option, but it's not a happily ever after for him and Cassiopeia. Serapio's distance from others is a choice made for him, but by the time you meet him as an adult, He's grown okay with that choice until meeting Chiala. The Between Earth and Sky trilogy is still in progress, but I wouldn't be surprised if Serapio and Chiala's relationship has a bittersweet conclusion. Obey is extremely emotional in his love for Audrey, but he's simultaneously extremely comfortable with using the marked ones as tools. He does not care about any human other than Audrey, which makes even that love for her questionable. Obey's willingness to sacrifice over half a dozen teenagers to bring Audrey back to life amplifies the gaps in his morality and ultimately means he won't succeed. Regardless of the growth or change in these beings over the course of their stories, the romantic paradigm remains Gothic. You will not achieve love without some serious sacrifice, and even then, that love still may not be actualized. Which sounds bleak, I won't lie, but the ride along the way is too compelling not to join in. In my last video applying a Gothic lens to modern media, I mentioned that a major point of Gothic literature is to impart to the audience some moral or value. But Gothic literature is also speculative. It functions as a way to ask and encourage the asking of questions. From that view, maybe the point of these romances isn't the possibility of actualized love, but what's uncovered and unraveled in the process. The allure of claiming what is forbidden is a Trojan horse. Come for the sex appeal, stay for the existential crisis and disillusion of that which once made sense to you. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. What was one of your childhood special interests? Mine was undeniably the Persephone season myth. I don't know what it was, but I was extremely invested. Speaking of seasons, happy fall or spring equinox. This is going up on Saturday, fingers crossed, but I'm recording on Sunday, so, a full 12 hours on both sides, allegedly. This was a short one, but I will be back soon with more spoopy content for October, time management willing. Fingers crossed once again. Until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.